Welcome to the Mercen podcast on the Catholic intellectual tradition. Today we have three students with us who are going to talk about whether or not the Catholic intellectual tradition has been passed down to them. So they can begin by introducing themselves.
My name is Deanna Lozinger, and I am a counseling, philosophy, and theology major, and I have been at Catholic school all my life, from kindergarten to 12th grade.
My name is Michael Edwards. I'm a math and philosophy double major. I'm from Ohio. I've been going to public schools ever since kindergarten until coming here to the University of Scranton.
My name is Amanda Lamphere. I am a double major in mathematics and computer science. I have been in Catholic education my whole life, and in high school specifically, I went to a private all-girls Catholic high school, and now I'm at Scranton.
Thank you, and welcome to the podcast. So to start off, the first thing I want to do is just look at the first paragraph of Ex Corde from John Paul II, where he talks about Catholic universities. So Amanda, could you read just the first paragraph?
Oh, for sure. There's some Latin in there, though, so that might be embarrassing.
That's okay.
Okay. Born from the heart of the Church, a Catholic university is located in that course of tradition which may be traced back to the very origin of the university as an institution. It has always been recognized as an incomparable center of creativity and dissemination of knowledge for the good of humanity. By vocation, the Universitas Magistronum et Scholarium is dedicated to research, to teaching, and to the education of students who freely associate with their teachers in a common love of knowledge. With every other university, it shares that gaudium de veritate, so precious to St. Augustine, which is that joy of searching for, discovering, and communicating truth in every field of knowledge. A Catholic university's privileged task is to unite existentially by intellectual effort two orders of reality that too frequently tend to be placed in opposition as though they were antithetical. Yes. The search for truth and certainty of already knowing the fount of truth.
Okay, so they didn't teach Latin at your all-girls school.
Oh, they did. I just didn't take it.
Okay.
I was a Spanish gal.
So I think the main point that I wanted to bring out there is that the Catholic intellectual tradition is more than just the theology of the Catholic Church. And it's even more than just the philosophy and theology of the Catholic Church. It impacts on all branches of knowledge. And because what it is saying is that all of these things are part of creation and are worthy of study and are important for a Catholic to study. And it's important to study all of these things, not simply things that are part of the faith, which is quite different, I think, than many other faith traditions, where they're generally, in many other faith traditions, they're only focused on the theology of their religion, where the Catholic intellectual tradition has been very, very broad in what it studies. And in fact, most universities, the universities in Europe, as it's explained there, come from the heart of the Church. They were all born from the Catholic Church, amongst even the oldest, Cambridge and Oxford and Bologna and things like this. All right. So what do you think so far in your education has been done right in terms of transmitting the Catholic tradition to you?
Starting in college or wherever?
Starting wherever you want. What about high school? What do you think was transmitted to you in high school? Was this transmitted or was it not?
Definitely. High school was a transitive experience for me learning about my faith, because it was the first time I was allowed to explore it without just being told what to do. I feel like elementary and middle schools tend to focus on the just getting out all the information to students, and you don't really get to think about it. And then when I got to high school, I remember my first theology professor told us to write a 3-page essay on who God was. And I said, well, what do you mean? He was like, whatever you interpret that to mean. It's like, do you want me to talk about like Father, Son, Holy Spirit? Like, what angle are we going for? He goes, whatever you want. And it was the first time in my life I actually had to sit down and think about who God was. And from then on, I just realized that it can be so much more about like critical thinking beyond just, having everything blindly transmitted to you. Does that make sense?
So do you remember what you said, who God was? Or what
I'm
your
pretty
theme
sure
was?
I wrote about the Father, Son, Holy Spirit because I was stressed and it was an essay. But it was really cool. And my professor had like a lot of interesting ideas in that class. And we talked about a lot of like proof of existence that God is real and like what you can see in the world that is proof of that. And it was the first time that we were even allowed to question whether God was real. Before that, I was never allowed to explore that side. We had a lot of, like, Socratic seminars where we would sit in a circle and, like, discuss, and people would get in debates. And I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. Yeah.
So how distinct do you think your education in high school was from somebody like Michael who went to public school?
I think definitely different in the fact that I had courses focused in theology. I think a lot of what sticks to me from high school, in all honesty, is that I also went to an all-girls high school. So it was a lot about the ideals of the Sisters of St. Joseph embedded in empowering women. And that was also something really big that I took from that. So I think just the ideas of virtue and generosity and peace, were all kind of things that were worked into our daily prayer that we had to say, the Mount Prayer. And those were all qualities that really stuck with me.
So I'm assuming you didn't have a daily prayer at public school in Ohio.
Not at all. Even though, I grew up in, like, I don't know if the correct term is suburban or rural. Something between those two. Suburban is correct.
Suburban.
And I was kind of, my peer group, of course, we didn't have any classes in theology or in philosophy, really. I think the closest we came was, like, reading the Psalms in one of our English classes for a particular project. But my peer group, and especially my close friends in high school, were, like, split right down the middle between, like, evangelical Christians and atheists. And so I remember I got a lot of theological education from my father, who's a huge nerd. And I say that in the most loving way possible. Other than that, it was in interactions and conversations with my peers. And I remember the most interesting thing was kind of not having a side, because I wasn't evangelical, like, creationist fundamentalist or anything like that. But I certainly wasn't atheist as well. So interacting with both of those kinds of people really interest me. And coming to the University of Scranton, it gave me an entirely new perspective.
So what drew you to the University of Scranton?
Honestly, honestly, it was my mom. She wanted me to go to a Jesuit school. She went to John Carroll. I wanted to go to a school out of state and one that would give me money. And so there was like a small couple schools that I checked out. I also checked out Xavier, which is in Ohio, but was sufficiently far away from my hometown. I wanted to get outside of Wadsworth a little bit. And so I took a visit to Scranton. I think it was one of like 3 schools that I applied to, and I ended up getting in. So that's how I came here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think returning back to your question just more generally about the Catholic intellectual tradition, one thing that I enjoyed in all of my classes that, for example, Mike probably wouldn't have even been able to have, is that they acknowledged just how much of science and math and the rest of just, the academic world was created by religious folks, whether that, it was, the priest that came up with the Big Bang Theory, or the priest that came up with the fundamentals of genetics and all that kind of stuff. So that was really good. And in general, too, my high school itself and the teachers that taught me theology were the people that got me interested in both theology and philosophy. And I even wanted to be an academic at one point, studying only theology and philosophy. But I've turned around, and now I want to be a therapist, a psychotherapist. But anyways, I think the one thing that really hooked me on to theology and philosophy, and they were really good at teaching this, was natural law.
I would say I knew a lot of those things from, like I said, from my father, who's Lutheran, and I've been raised Lutheran, but half of my family is Catholic, and we entirely respect the Catholic tradition. And I would broach the subject of, for example, famous Catholic scientists in debates with my friends about the Big Bang or whatnot. And the replies that I would occasionally get were, yeah, well, they're Catholic, and Catholics are weird. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the Big Bang was a term that was come up by atheists to mock the theory, not to. It was the atheists who didn't believe the theory and were mocking it because it sounded too much like Genesis, because it was Lemaitre, a priest, who did come up with the idea. But now it's stuck. So, meant originally as a mockery, it now sticks. Let's talk about specific disciplines then. So you've all taken theology here at the University of Scranton. So what aspects of theology do you think were best taught to you here while you were at the University of Scranton?
I had Dr. Johnson for theology too, and she, just a lovely woman in general, and I really enjoyed going to her class because it was more discussion based. It was about modern theology, whereas, theology one that I was in was very just reading the Bible, and we had to read the Bible, and then we had to reread it, and then we had to come with notes to class. So it was very, very focused on the Bible, and it was kind of to bring everyone up to the same level of education, because not everyone has the Catholic education that a lot of students here come in with. But it kind of reminded me of that back in elementary school, being, told the stories, being told. There wasn't as much discourse, so I really loved Dr. Johnson's class because there was so much discourse, and she tried to tie in other religious traditions where she could too. So I felt like I gained a more worldly aspect than I was expecting to get in a theology class. And I always love to talk about that on my tours when I give tours of Scranton, because I think that's something important to point out, and that even though theology is a requirement at the university, there's so many different facets of it that students can explore. So even if you are not Catholic, there are so many ways that you can learn from those courses.
Did she talk a lot about literature in that class?
Yes.
Because she's very big into the literature and how that transmits ideas, something like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or things like this.
We did read C.S. Lewis. We read a lot, and we would write discussion posts, and then we would comment on others' discussion posts, whether we agreed or disagreed, which was really interesting. Unfortunately, it was also during the semester that we were sent home for the pandemic.
Oh.
So it was great, those first 2 months, but then you had to finish that last month online, so.
What C.S. Lewis did she have you read? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do remember we read at least one C.S. Lewis.
Maybe Mere Christianity or Screw Tape Letters?
No.
Oh, okay.
Neither of those, I don't think.
Michael, how about your experience here in theology?
So I came in, I was planning to study theology. I actually decided that, I think when I was in high school as a junior or senior. And I think that what motivated that was a little bit of questioning, not Christianity in general for me, but my own tradition as a Lutheran, and looking at the possibility of maybe entering into Catholicism. Or I also had a friend in high school who was Orthodox, and so that interested me as well. So I was coming in to study theology looking for something like doctrinal history and patristic fathers' writings and things like that, and I didn't find quite as much of that here. But I think the one class that I think might have touched on those themes more so than others, I took a class called Faith and Justice in the Prophetic Tradition, which is reading into a lot of the Old Testament that I was less familiar with, and I enjoyed that class because it sort of bridged the gap between looking at it from a historical angle and also from how that sort of applies to modern topics.
Who taught you that class?
Dr. Frine or Frayne?
And Bridget Frine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what drew you to the patristics? You just wanted a foundational, was this like a mathematical side that you wanted to find the axioms of the faith? And
Pretty much. Actually, I remember when I was still in high school and I was interested in theology, and interested in theology meant I was looking up pages on Instagram talking about it. But I remember in particular that a lot of the pop theology that I was being exposed to was coming at from like at a Calvinist Reformed angle, which sort of jarred me, I don't know, emotionally or intellectually speaking. And I was looking for something that subverted that, or something that was more authentic to what I thought was the true spirit of Christianity.
Excellent. And your theology classes?
Yeah, I think my theology classes, especially I think coming from a Jesuit angle, really solidified the social justice aspects of Christianity that I was not super familiar with, or because like I think when I was in high school, I had this fascination with theology from an apologetic standpoint that I just really, really, really wanted to crush atheists and really wanted to just do like, you know, the logic, like here it is, you know, God is real and all that. But then once I came here, all of this talk about justice, and I had been very interested in ethics from, you know, both high school and now in college. It's basically my entire life here at the university. Most of the classes I take are within the ethical traditions in both philosophy and theology. It kind of changed my whole perspective on theology. And now in terms of like what I came in here to study, I thought I would just study counseling, psychology, and philosophy. And I thought like, oh yeah, there's like I can't do like a theology major. That'd just be too much. But once I got here, I realized that the actual curriculum was so flexible, and I had been taking 18 credits up until this semester. So I ended up with a theology major just by happenstance, which is great. I also really, really have benefited from the more historical aspects of Christianity and the Bible, that I can understand it more in a context, first of all, of just like the history of Christianity itself, but also the history of the Bible. That was, you know, set from my Theo 1 class in Bible, and I think my favorite class so far has actually been the class on the Book of Revelation that was taught by Father Michael Azer. That was a really, really good class because he, of course, talked about it in theological terms, but he really dispelled a lot of the myths that Revelation, well, at least like the myth, I believe they're myths that, you know, like pop culture throws around about Revelation. And he gave more of a historical context of, you know, why was John writing this and everything like that. So.
And so which books, other than the Bible, of course, have most impacted you in theology that you've read so far?
There was this one book I read in high school, but I can't remember the name in this moment. So I'm trying to think of it.
What was it about?
It was about proof of existence of God, and it kind of talked about theology from that angle. And I can't remember what it was, but my theology professor, I loved his class so much that at the end of the semester he called me into his office and he gifted me the book. And I was like obsessed with it for like a year. Like it was the only thing I talked about. But yeah, I can't remember what it's called. It's gonna bother me now.
In freshman year, I read The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis.
That was the C.S. Lewis that I read. Also great. Anyway, go ahead.
Maybe, Michael, you could just answer for Amanda.
Yeah, Michael's actually my spokesperson. I'm just here.
I remember, this is totally off topic, but my little brother going to college in Gannon, and they were taking a class in like theology and ethics, and his book, he was not reading any of the ancient great philosophers or anything. He came home with a book that said like, why bother being good? And I was like, yeah, you're getting a great education.
Well, and I don't really want to, I feel like some people in the university, because they're not seeking out the Catholic intellectual tradition, that's all there is. And so, you know, they want the easiest classes, and they end up, you know, reading a book like that with those easy classes instead of reading, you know, Plato, for instance.
Well, have you been exposed to Aquinas, Augustine, people like this here?
Yes, I was thinking about the book in theology that really my favorite book in theology, and I was blanking, but I think Confessions. I haven't, I read it 2 years ago, so not super fresh in my mind, but it was a really, really good book.
Did you all have to read Confessions, Augustine's Confessions?
Yes. We also read that.
Most classes do.
I think
Most do too, but some don't.
We read the first, I think, 9 books for Crocus Theology 2, which was just up through his sort of autobiographical story. And
so did you spend a day just talking about him stealing that apple from the tree?
Yes.
it was a pear, I believe. But yes.
Oh, yeah, I've heard many debates about the linguistic translation and whether it's an apple or something else, but...
I think at the time Crocus told us, we're not going to read any of the books after that because that's when it starts to get like abstract and bizarre and theoretical. And I was probably sitting there thinking like, oh, that sounds really interesting to me. But of course, I'm a lazy college student. I couldn't find time to ever finish it.
So what did you think of Augustine's life story? I mean, he started off as not the greatest guy in the world. I mean, he definitely had some missteps.
He was a major player. What are you talking about?
He was, I don't think you'd meet 20-year-old Augustine and say, yeah, this man is destined for sainthood. That's why I think it's good for a college student to read that, is that you see somebody who was definitely off the tracks and came back on the tracks. Of course, through the help of his mother, St. Monica.
Your mom is always right.
True.
I love you, Mom.
I love my mother as well.
I love you too, Mom.
I sure hope that you do.
Yeah, just get it out of the way. Hi, Mom.
So did you read any Aquinas in any of those courses? Anything from the Summa Theologica?
I've had fragments in a bunch of courses. In metaphysics, we did some of his proofs for God. In my ethics class, we read a couple passages on natural law, and we also read a couple passages in a class that I had last semester, Catholic Social Thought.
Same thing here. I take the same classes as him, though, so.
See, I think and I've written a paper on this with Dwayne Armitage, that there's a distinct correlation between natural law and divine law as in terms of mathematics. In other words, as you know, that the math majors know, that there are things we can prove in mathematics, and there are things like the continuum hypothesis that we can't, that we know we cannot produce a proof of, which I make a parallel then between the natural law and the divine law. So the natural law might get you to say the existence of God, but it wouldn't naturally bring you to say the Trinity, right? That would be something that God has to tell you for us to know that that's the truth, rather than something you could argue to the existence of God, but maybe you couldn't argue to the existence of the Trinity. So in mathematics, it's that same thing. Logic and reason will only take you so far in mathematics, and then after a certain point, they don't work anymore. In other words, you can no longer produce a proof of these results because there are certain limitations to what we can know and what we can't know. Which, to me, I see that in the difference between Aquinas's natural law and divine law. And of course, in the Western Christianity, there was always this notion that we can know things, that we can know everything. They wanted to know. They thought that they could decide on everything. But in Eastern Christianity, in the Eastern philosophical tradition, they definitely had the notion that there's certain things that were just unknowable, and it was okay to not know them. You might say something about the transubstantiation. I mean, in the West, they wanted to say the transubstantiation occurs right when the priest says this word. And in the East, they would just say, it happens sometime. We don't know when. And it doesn't really matter, but it happens. We know it happens. And there's no reason that we have to know that exact moment. All right, so how about philosophy? What about your philosophy classes? What most struck you in them? Amanda, do you have an answer, or do you want Michael to answer for you?
I'm thinking back. I took all of mine my first year.
Wow.
So it's been a while. I don't have as extensive as a background, I feel like, as you guys. I had Professor Nordberg, right, my first year. And just one of the sweetest professors ever. I really enjoyed it. I don't remember everything I read. I remember enjoying it, and for a while there, I thought about picking up a philosophy minor just because I thought it was fascinating. And then I, kind of switched my major like 3 times, so that never really happened.
So what did you read in philosophy? Do you remember? Did you read Plato?
Yes, I read Plato both semesters. I actually reread some of what I read in Philosophy 1 in Philosophy 2, which is ethics. There was a lot of crossover between those courses, and I don't think every ethics course is that way, but the professor I had for ethics decided to teach...
Who taught you ethics?
Professor Granahan? Yeah. Lovely man. He taught a 5 to 6:15, and let me tell you, getting students engaged at that time is not always the easiest. But every time we laughed, he was like, "Oh, good. I can see you laugh behind your masks." Anyway.
So did you read Plato and you read Aristotle as well?
Yes. We read both.
What did you read of Aristotle? Do you remember? Is it ethics? Ethics? No, you don't remember.
No.
Did you read his metaphysics?
I don't think so. Might have read
I'd
excerpts.
assume that he would have picked excerpts from Nicomachean Ethics.
Yeah,
'cause that's
we
what I
read
did as
some
well.
excerpts, but I remember rereading a lot of the stuff I had read in Philosophy 1, which was interesting.
Because it's my most ardent philosophical belief that everyone either thinks like Plato or thinks like Aristotle. That there's no third choice.
Really? Fascinating.
So-
I always enjoyed reading Plato.
Oh, that's good, because that's the correct one.
Of course, there's always a correct answer with you.
That's true. But I like Plato's ideas better than Aristotle's.
Yeah.
Although Aquinas was definitely the Christianizing of Aristotle, and I really like Aquinas.
I was gonna more on that point in our Catholic social thought class, when we were reading excerpts from A City of God, and we were talking about how I think it was Dr. Clark was making sort of a comparison between, on the one hand, Plato and Augustine, and on the other hand, Aquinas and Aristotle. And I maybe it's the Protestant roots in me, but I really like Augustine and Plato.
Well, they've always said Augustine is Plato plus Christianity, and Aquinas is Aristotle plus Christianity. But I think Aristotle goes much deeper than Aristotle in terms of theological matters. And I think Augustine brings a lot to the table too. So it's not simply that, but they're definitely in the same vein, I would say. Yeah.
I think another class that's not philosophy, but is a class that I took for the SJLA program that sort of was really interesting to me. It was a replacement class for another English class that we were supposed to have, but that the professor had retired or something. So they were just saying, they gave us a list of classes and said, pick one of these and it'll fulfill your credit. It was called, I think, British Literature in the 14th Century. We read Chaucer, we read a bunch of poetry, and the thing that struck me most is that there was more theology in that class than in some of my actual theology classes. Even though we were reading just stories and poems, it was just such steeped in theological imagery and language. And that really inspired me, I guess.
Philosophy
Yes,
class?
philosophy. Well, first I'll mention, interestingly, that I had an acquaintance my first semester tell me, it's kind of weird that Catholic schools make you take philosophy. And then I said, why? And then she's like, because the whole thing is about questioning God, and we study philosophers that don't believe that God exists, and I feel like that's counterintuitive. And I'm like, really? And then so I had this kind of, I just remembered that, and I think philosophy is good in that way, that it makes you actually consider what you do believe, instead of just believing in something just because your parents do, or just because it's just the thing to do. Really critically thinking, why do I believe in that? And I've came out of the philosophy, still a Christian, which is great. Other people don't, but I think
the idea is that this is going to strengthen your faith eventually.
And that's the way that I've seen it.
All right, so the Catholic intellectual tradition, as we said, is more than just theology or philosophy. So in your own disciplines that you're studying, Do you see any difference in the way you're being educated here as opposed to the way you'd be educated, say, at some state school? Just in general. Do you...
Yeah, so I'm taking a class called the Jesuit Magis. It's for SJLA, and so this is taught by Dr. Crocus, a theologian, so obviously it's not in my particular discipline of counseling, but I am seeing so many parallels between Ignatius's thought and theories of counseling. And I am also taking a class on theories of counseling right now. And I'd say in most of my counseling classes, they breach the Jesuit tradition, and basically just everything's kind of watered down, but they do breach, the men and women for others and the cura personalis, which is great because that's, I think, the number one thing to have in counseling. That you can't just think of everything as cognitive processes. You have to, see this person in front of you as a full being. But anyways,
I think in your discipline, that's the fundamental difference in that we're looking at the whole person. If you're in a Catholic situation, you're looking at the whole person and seeing their entire well-being, where you're probably not going to learn that at Penn State.
Yeah, and I've thought about that too, because I actually entered the university as a psychology major because I didn't know that there was a counseling major, because most schools don't offer it. But as soon as I found out about it, so this was actually like in the summer I switched my major, so like technically I came in as a counseling major, but I applied as psychology, and because I knew that all my other schools, they only had psych majors. Although a lot of the psych majors at the other schools, I only applied to Catholic schools because I knew that I wanted a perspective on psychology and counseling that was more holistic and more about the spiritual aspects of the human person and not just about the cognitive and, neuroscientific kind of aspects of psychology. So as soon as I made that switch, I think that was really fruitful for me because, first of all, I aspire to be a therapist. I don't aspire to be a research psychologist. But second of all, I think it really spoke to me in understanding the human condition rather than kind of more the scientific aspects of human behavior.
Well, in mathematics, honestly, not quite as much. I have one professor, very humble man, who does give us fun facts about when it's a different saint's day or something like that. I can think of one other philosophical discussion that I had in a math class. It was Chaos and Fractals, taught by Dr. Monks. And we had a discussion, to make a long story short, about whether or not actual intelligible structure exists in the world or if it's just applied by humans. But other than that, I feel like, for me, I study enough philosophy and theology that I like to go into a math class and put those things to the side a little bit.
But do you see mathematics differently than you think somebody would who is not constantly thinking about theological and philosophical issues?
Definitely. Maybe another thing is that I took a class in philosophy called Symbolic Logic, and it was almost exactly the same as my Intro to Proof class, and people were questioning, why is this in the philosophy department? And so we had a discussion about what role logic and intelligibility plays in philosophy. As a sort of humorous anecdote, I used to tell people, or I still do tell people back in Ohio and when I meet them, that I study math and philosophy. And my father always makes the same comments and joke that lots of people would assume that those are two different subjects, but they're, it's just logical thinking about both of them. They're just pretty similar. Most people wouldn't think that. And I'm like, yep, that's true.
So do you think it affects your philosophy of mathematics in terms of...
I tend to not think about philosophy of mathematics as much as I think about computations and derivatives and integrals and hopefully not trigonomic functions.
Amanda, how about you and your discipline?
I laughed when you were talking about learning about the proofs of logic because I remember being in Philosophy 1 and Intro to Proofs at the same time and being so excited because I love when my courses overlap and you can kind of make comments in both that relate to the other. So I also remember going through that. But yeah, I definitely think you gain a more holistic perspective. Personally, in my major, I took the history and philosophy of math. Thought that was really fascinating, talking about whether math is created or if it's discovered, which
It obviously is not. It is.
we went back and forth. I brought up the idea of a compromise, and then Dr. Carroll thought that was funny, and we kept that going for like 30 minutes. But I really enjoyed being able to discuss stuff like that, and I think...
So what is your position on that? Is it created or discovered?
I'm so bad at picking a side because I do think it's a little bit of both, but I would say it is discovered.
Excellent. That's the right answer.
That's the right answer. I'm so glad.
That's what I'm gonna
You
say
won't
as
kick me
well.
off now?
Dr. Carroll would definitely disagree with that. We've had debates of this many, many times over the past 30 years.
Because you disagree on everything, of course.
Right, that's true.
Of course.
Absolutely. But I think from a Catholic perspective, from a theistic perspective, you tend to take a Platonic view of mathematics, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think in the mind of God, God already knows this. So it is already there. It exists. I think it's if you're not coming from a theistic place, then I think the debate becomes more difficult. But I think it's hard to really have the notion of God in terms of the Judeo-Christian tradition and not view mathematics platonically, I think.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong about that. So while you are a mathematician and a computer scientist,
I am.
you're also something else. You're an actress.
Oh, I am.
How does your Catholic background and your Catholic education impact your acting? How do you think?
Wow, that's a large question. I would say I've never really thought about them overlapping.
You don't find, say, acting to be a spiritual kind of exercise?
I think...
I mean, if you're acting,
can be.
if you're taking on a role,
Mhm.
then you have to understand what another person is thinking,
Yes.
feeling, which is a fundamental idea in Catholicism, right? That you're supposed to understand, that you're supposed to communicate with an other, right?
Mhm.
That you regard them as something wonderful, not as something just like competing with you for food,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that so to try to understand them as a human being, I think can be a very spiritual experience.
Yeah, and I would say it's something that I would not have considered myself very good at until college. And some people agree with me, some people don't. I never considered myself a great actress because I did have that struggle of being able to completely separate from myself and be someone else. And I think part of that was, a lack of confidence, especially, when you're 13, really getting into the character of the Cat in the Hat. Sometimes it's really difficult. But, being able to completely remove yourself and put your mind in a different state of mind is something that I've gotten much better at. And now I consider a really great quality of me being an actress, being able to walk into an audition, not singing a song from the show, but being able to portray exactly the character that I'm going for because I've already put myself in that headspace. I just have to do it to a different song. So I think that has been something that I've explored about myself, especially through Leva, that has been really unique.
See, I think I couldn't be a good actor because I can't separate myself from anything. So if I had to play Hamlet, I would just be playing me if I was a Danish king, right? Or Macbeth me as if I was a murderous,
Yes.
crazy person, right? I don't think... I find it almost impossible to do that. So I admire an actress who can separate themselves from the role that they're playing and really adopt that other person's personality.
Thank you.
So I find it's an extremely difficult thing to do.
It's very difficult. And I would say, really, the first time I ever did that was The Addams Family. And I think that's in part because I played a character that was so completely opposite of my personality to the fact that it was humorous to everyone else, that it really was...
So you were playing Morticia Addams.
I was playing Morticia Addams. For those who don't know me, I would kind of consider myself a bubbly individual, one might say. I'm a talkative type. I'm enough. I am enough. I am enough. You are enough. We're all enough. But Morticia's the complete opposite of that. And there were a lot of people that did not believe that I could pull it off. There were a lot of people that told me to go out for different roles in that show because they did not think I would be able to do it. And I was very grateful to be given the opportunity to play Morticia because I proved a lot of people wrong. And, you know, I still have random people come up to me this day and talk about Morticia. I mean, it was only a year ago. But still, like, it's nice to know that I can pull something off that's so opposite of myself.
And I saw your performance. It was quite good.
Oh, thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you.
Even if you didn't understand all the references made by your characters in the play.
I know. Apparently a lot of things went over my head. What else is new?
And you don't feel marginalized that the church is historically not taken too fondly to actors?
Why do you say the church is not taken too fondly to actors?
Oh.
Who has taken fondly to actors?
Oh, that's a valid point. Yeah, acting really started in Greek tradition.
There's been speculation that Shakespeare, you know, was a secret Catholic.
Really?
Yeah, because
I love that theory.
at the time, of course, you couldn't admit to being a Catholic, or you know, you had a lot to pay for. But the people have speculated that Romeo and Juliet was about Catholics and Protestants. And when that initial speech that the narrator describes, you know, two houses equal in stature and all of these things, that he's trying to show that they shouldn't want to kill each other, right? That they should be getting along. I mean, it's not that simple, but he really, really explains it. And if you look at them as the Montagues, the Capulets, as the Catholics and the Protestants, right? I think you could see a lot in that play. It was as close he could come to actually talking about it without getting his head chopped off, you know? So I think there's a lot in Shakespeare that really talks about this kind of stuff. I mean, of course, not everything, but I think there is there.
It's fascinating. It makes a lot of sense.
But I think in drama and literature, you could talk about theological and philosophical issues very easily without people actually noticing you're talking about philosophical and theological issues, right? In other words, if I were to come at you with the Baltimore Catechism, do you know what the Baltimore Catechism is? The Baltimore Catechism is the book they used to give children to learn, and it was just like a bunch of questions. Who is God? Why did God make me? Blah, blah, blah. It just had
Like
the
the confirmation
questions.
questions?
Yeah, that's right. It had questions and it had answers, and it was just like drilling points into you. Right, so if you just start saying this to people, maybe they don't. It doesn't have. I mean, it's okay when you're 6 years old, but if you're 20 years old, that doesn't ring true. But if you're reading a really good piece of literature, seeing a play that really has a deep thought that you don't even notice it's theological until you go home and start thinking about it, I think it can have an enormous impact.
Do you think it goes over some people's heads, though?
Absolutely.
So, you know, how can it be more beneficial for people to pick up on those themes?
I don't think. Here's what I think. Anytime you have 10 people in a room and you show them something that's spectacular, life-changingly spectacular, maybe 4 of the people don't even notice. Maybe 3 of the people have a wonderful time but don't get the deep thought. And maybe 3 do. So that's a good enough percentage to keep trying. You can't expect to show everybody. Because if you make it so low level that it becomes terrible, right? It's like, you all know TV shows where they're aiming at the lowest possible level, right? And you think, this is just terrible. Nobody likes this, right? Because they have an idea that you can't put in a joke unless everybody gets the joke. Where if you have a show where they can put in jokes that not everybody gets, that makes it so much better because they can actually tell good jokes. And so maybe you miss half the jokes. But like you did
Like
when
me?
when you were
Family.
performing them. I mean, in the Addams Family, there were jokes that were tremendously funny that got enormous laughs from everyone who was over 40 in the crowd, and who the actors themselves did not know that they were jokes. Am I right? So
That's
you
true.
always miss that, but it doesn't matter because somebody is going to get it. You don't have to get absolutely everything that's spread out to you. You know, if you're reading a really great poem, for example, not everybody gets the same thing out of that poem, but that's all right. is if you see a great painting, some people see more in it than others. It's just what happens. So you have to see a lot of things, see a lot of paintings, see a lot of plays, read a lot of books, and then one of them is going to speak to you on your level. Not level is the wrong word, and from your own experiences, right? So if say you're a person who suffered a lot, and you see something about somebody suffering, you might understand their experience better. Where if you haven't, then you're looking at this and you may not get the spiritual benefit from that. Where if you're somebody else who's deeply involved in the arts and you see somebody exploring the arts in a role, and then you say, well, that speaks to me, right? So I think a lot of times it goes over people's heads, much like my lectures in mathematics. Right?
Sure.
You have to
Definitely would go over my head.
But it's okay, in mathematics we always have this idea that it's okay if the first time you hear something you don't really understand it. Because maybe the second time, then maybe you understand 20%. Maybe the third time, this.
And after the fourth time, the doctor already calls you a moron. You got it.
You got it.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating. After being in your class 3 times and still learning some of the same material, like modular arithmetic I've learned in, I think, all 3 of your classes,
Yeah.
the third time it really clicks. Like, you really get things that before you were just, like, trying to memorize a proof, and you're like, oh, now maybe I could actually logic my way through this.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
So don't you look at that now and think, how did I not understand it the first time? This is so, like,
Oh, yeah.
sometimes you see, this is so easy. How
For
did I
sure.
not understand that the first time?
And then I feel bad for, like, people who it is their first time, and then you have other people that have seen it 3 or 4 times, and they feel like they need to be on your level, and you're like, no, I was where you were at 3 years ago. Like, don't panic over that.
But it's the same thing for spiritual or anything else. The first time maybe you don't get it. The second time maybe you do. The third time you get a little more. There's a C.S. Lewis book, the Screw Tape Letters. Has anybody read the Screw Tape Letters? It's a book. It's an uncle talking to his nephew. The uncle is a important demon, and the nephew is an unimportant demon trying to make this guy go to hell, right? And I've read the book in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, even in my 50s, which I'm now in. And each time I read that, I gained much more out of it than the previous time. Because when I was in my 20s, I was too stupid to get most of the... In other words, I thought, well, that's not me. Right? I'm not... This is great and everything, and the book is really tremendous, and it's funny and all this other kind of stuff. But I didn't understand the deeper ideas when I was 20. When I was 30, I understood slightly more. 40, slightly more. And I'm sure if I make it to 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 every year, every time it's going to give me more, right? So, I mean, that's just everything. So it's important to keep going back to old ideas and to get them deeper and deeper and deeper. All right, so what, yeah, go ahead.
One joke. I heard that reading C.S. Lewis's fiction is like reading a somewhat very profound theological allegory, and then you'll come across a character named Mr. Bloopity Bloppity.
That's true. Even in the Narnia series, Santa Claus, essentially Father Christmas, I think he calls it, appears, and Tolkien just hated that. He hated absolutely that he threw this in there, but C.S. Lewis said no, this has to be in there, and he liked the idea. I really like C.S. Lewis's writing, and I think he was a master at writing. So even if he had not had the great spiritual insights, he would have still had great literature because he was just so clever. But I think the spiritual dimension adds just so much more to his writing. So what other aspects of your Catholic education here have really impacted you that you think, what do you think was actually transmitted to you well here? Yes.
So I give this little spiel literally every time I give a tour. And I always say, whether professors here realize it or not, the biggest thing that I take from Scranton is how the professors demonstrate cura personalis. And that has been my favorite part of learning the Jesuit traditions, seeing it in actions by my professors. And I would not be where I am today without the professors that I met here. And, it's kind of, I think, also a little bit partial to Scranton, a little bit partial to who I am as, an individual, an academic, whatever. But I really do think that somehow Scranton really seeks out these faculty members that really just care about their students on a whole level. Inside the classroom, outside the classroom, I had theology professors that asked me to come to their office hours just to make sure that I was doing well my first year and finding everything okay on campus. You know, you always come to my musicals, and as much as you tease me about them, it has always meant so much that a professor that has nothing to do with that would go out of their way to come see me in an extracurricular activity. I was out sick one day from a class, and a professor, you know, emailed me and said, "Hey, your classmates told me you were sick. I hope you feel better." Things that professors don't have to do. But I am just constantly reminded at Scranton that there are people that are going out of their way. And even on my academic journey, I did not come to Scranton as a mathematics, computer science major. I came in as an education major. And it is purely through interactions I've had with professors on campus that have encouraged me to explore more of myself and push myself and look at other career paths that I am where I am today. And I could not be more thankful for that opportunity. So I'm a big fan of the Jesuit tradition for that.
Well, from my point of view as a faculty member here, I can say that's why I came here. That's why I wanted to come here to work. I wanted that environment. I really don't like the environment of, say, the big state school. So maybe at a big research school, I would have slightly more time for research. But I hated the atmosphere I had where you didn't know the students at all. You know, you were teaching a class of 200 people, and so class of 200 people, you can't interact with them as human beings, right? They're just numbers on a sheet of paper. And you're just giving lectures. You're not Socratically dialoguing with somebody. And you also don't interact with them outside of class, which is what I liked here. This is what I liked here as a student. I was a student once, you know, years ago.
Really? Here?
Here.
At this university? I would have never known.
And that's what I liked about it, is that I had professors who actually were interested in me as a human being, which was an amazing thing to me, right? Because you don't get that everywhere. And that's why I liked this place, and that's why I wanted to teach here.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm adding that to my tour script.
So how about, what aspect of your education here really struck you as something that you wouldn't have got somewhere else?
That's a really good question, to be honest, because when I'm thinking about just my trajectory, I only applied to Catholic schools, like I said, because I wanted a specific type of psychology that was more invested in the human condition, and rather than, you know, the scientific, like I said. But I think one thing that I'm trying to think out of the box, I think I realized that Christianity itself, and just in general, like my thing, I don't know, I can't speak today. It all transcends ideology. That for a lot of time, for a long time, I've been a very ideologically driven person. That, you know, like I'm on the left or I'm on the right, or I'm, you know, like I'm Catholic, you know, like because, and you know, like I mean, I'm still Catholic, but you know what I mean. That like it you know, I have to follow this ideology rather than realizing, and I've realized this through many of my classes, that ideologies are all man-made, and that really it's more about seeing what God wills, if that makes any sense.
Sounds very Platonic to me. Seems like you're avoiding the shadows. You initially were looking at the shadows, and now you want to look at the fire, which is
yes.
very Platonic and perfectly acceptable. Michael, how about you? What about
one of the memories that has survived my sleepless nights of doing homework is in last year, in one of our SJLA classes, we had oral examinations. This was for philosophy of conscience, and I remember, you know, being a very sheepish and shy student, walking into the room on 5th floor to get quizzed on Kant and Karl Marx, and I remember throughout the whole examination, Dr. Black was just staring right into my soul, it felt like. And he was wearing his baseball cap, and he had his eyebrows furled up. And it was really intimidating me, not in a terrible way, not in an unbearable way. But I was after the examination finished, we were sort of discussing it, and he was debriefing me and asking me how it went. And I told him that I realized that might have been the first time in my career as a student where I was aware of the fact that I was speaking to somebody who was actually thinking about what I was saying, rather than trying to see whether or not I said a certain buzzword or something like that. And that was a very powerful experience.
I think that's at the heart of a Jesuit education.
Which is why you should bring back math oral exams.
It would just be brutal. I had oral exams myself, and the nice part about it is you can get so much more spoken than you can written, right? You could write as fast as you can. In 2 hours, there's only so much you could write down, or in an hour. Where in an hour, you could say quite a lot. So you could actually show that you know a lot more than you can, I think, on paper.
Well, see, I would say my ideal would be like a take-home test or an essay, something, so that I can formalize all my words and make sure that I'm not saying any filler things or like, or anything like that. I just did it again. But
here's what I don't like about a take-home test, though, is then that it's never done, right? So
Yeah.
you're going to stay up all night because you think I could just keep putting something else into this. Where if somebody says, look, you come in and you have an hour and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So then it's done and you go home and you're done with it, right? So it doesn't hang over your head like a cloud.
I mean, I feel like I like to be very precise with my language, and that's something that working on SJLA classes where I do public speaking, that's something that a skill that I'm trying to develop, is to be able to speak off the cuff with the same precision that I would have if I were, writing a paper that I had time to go back and edit.
Well, that's a very hard thing to ask of oneself. All right, so let me ask this question. From my point of view, as a Catholic intellectual myself, I've always stated that I think the most important thing is to have a life of prayer, so that, in other words, you could have the intellectual life you like, but without a life of prayer, you're not really being drawn closer to God, and you could learn just a lot. So I think it's not like you don't have to learn. Of course, I would never say that, but I'm saying that they work symbiotically, and that if you're not living a life of prayer, then you've missed the point of what's being taught to you in theology. So what has your experience been of, say, a life of prayer here on campus? Yeah.
So I always struggled with prayer throughout, like elementary school, high school, and even here. And when I was in high school, I always just blamed myself, like I'm just a bad Catholic and yada, yada, yada. I think I realize now that it's more about like the way that I was taught to pray. And especially, I don't have the best attention span. I don't think that any of us Gen Zers have the best attention span. So as soon as I get a little bit distracted, then I'm saying, okay, I'm a bad Catholic. I can't pay attention during Mass. I can't do anything right. But recently, I've been learning about how the Jesuits see prayer as contemplation. And sometimes, so first of all, actually, when I was taking a particular course on that we talked about contemplation, Jesuit contemplation a lot. It was in the summer when I had one of my first jobs as an amusement park attendant, and I still do that in the summer. And whenever I would go to work, I would think about what I'd been reading, and I thought, I'm seeing all this joy and happiness, and like the children and the families, and I just love it. And this like this is, for at least I think it was Burghardt, Father Burghardt. I don't remember his first name, but this was a Jesuit. I think in the 60s, he wrote about contemplation, and he was talking about taking a long, loving look at the now. And I applied that in my job, and I took this long, loving look at the now. And now I kind of relate it to, of course, being a counseling major, I think of like flow states, which, like they're states which you really feel like you're in your element. It can be done through a hobby like singing or acting, and it can also be done through kind of more mindless activities. I know I don't really want to say that, but things like coloring and things like taking a shower. But the thing about flow states too is that you lose track of time. And I always enjoy whenever I'm in that kind of state. And I can even be in that kind of state when I'm writing a paper, as long as like the conditions are right. If I lose track of time, and I think for me, that is what prayer is, that it's losing track of time and just focusing on the here and now in a mindful way. That I sound so much like a counseling major at this point, right?
This is beautifully eloquent.
Oh, thank
I
you.
am in all of this right now. I love
thank
this.
And it's of course, like you have to center yourself back to the person of Jesus and God. You can't just like be off on your own. It's not like astral projection or anything like that. I'm not bringing that in. But yeah, I think prayer to me has evolved, because before it was just kind of more like rote prayer. And also another thing was that in high school I had a lot of opportunities for retreats, and because of that I was actually able to focus on the here and now, and I didn't have these anxieties of like tests and all this kind of stuff looming over my head, so I could just focus on the here and now. And then I had a lot of good spiritual fruit from those retreats. I haven't gone on a retreat in a very long time. They offer them at the university. I just haven't, taken that opportunity, unfortunately. But I think within my current lifestyle, as a college student, very stressful lifestyle, being able to take those moments of solace and live in the here and now in all of my different like things that are happening in my life, whether it's a class or it's in my own bedroom, actually, praying like traditionally to God. That I think that's prayer for me.
Okay, excellent.
All right. I would say personally, yes.
Yes. That was
that's
more than enough.
To hear on this question. I was gonna say, I feel like I would have more time for prayer if I had less time for studying for math tests and doing my math homework. Something sort of similar to, I guess, that, thinking of contemplation and whatnot. I've been reading a little Kierkegaard in my existentialism class, and this is with Dr. Armitage. And he has a chapter in that about time, and Kierkegaard is very dense. But Armitage summarized it as like, you want to be in a state where time feels like it's passing at the proper speed, where it's not dragging on, but it's also not skipping by, so that you feel like you're going to be like losing the good that's now, or the good that is here now. That you want to be in the moment, and to be in a place where you can contemplate well is to have time feel like it's passing at the proper speed. And that's sort of a sign that you really are engaged with the here and now. Other than that, I just as in terms of like an anecdote, I learned the rosary here at college. Deanna taught me actually, because growing up Lutheran, of course, I did not have experience with it, although like, again, half of my family is Catholic, so I knew about it.
I'm the best girlfriend.
And whatnot. So
So-
that was a fun experience.
So what do you think of the rosary when you pray it? Is it a positive experience for you praying the rosary?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, what we used to do is we used to pray it on a Zoom call with members from her parish. I think that the rosary, I've never had like prayer for me, I guess at this point, with the whole stressful college life, is about just finding a time that I can just kind of clear my head and finding a time that I can become centered. And I remember especially going to Mass on Sundays after a stressful week. It wasn't even like so much what was said or the readings, but just being in the sanctuary with my peers that was meaningful. And when I prayed the rosary, even if I'm not in the right headspace, even if I'm not intentionally thinking about saying the words and thinking about religious thoughts, if it's me doing something, I don't know the exact way to put it.
Can I say what I think you're saying?
Okay.
I think you're taking a hesychastic view of the prayer, which means, so hesychism is an Eastern Christian idea. So here's what it is. It's like if you say the Jesus prayer, the Jesus prayer, and if you're saying the rosary or something like this, where there is this repetitive aspect of it, is that each one is sort of bringing you closer to God, right? So it doesn't matter that if you're focusing on every single word or if you're having deep thoughts, that's irrelevant. It's that you're just being drawn closer, and the closer you come, the farther away all of your earthly cares are. So you're removing your earthly cares and just moving closer and closer to God.
Yeah. So I think another part of that is, I remember I took an elective in theology, and it was a very odd class. It was called Religion, Bodies, and Brains. It was with Dr. Olson, and it was an interesting class because it didn't really have, it had a syllabus, but we didn't really follow the syllabus at all. It was sort of just a time for Olson to share articles with us, share clips and just different, it was like an intellectual sandbox, he told us. But part of what we're talking about is the connection between neuroscience and religion, which we didn't actually really go that deeply into science, but the important aspects of ritual in your life of faith, so that if you're doing the ritual of praying, even if you're not intellectually there, it's doing something to your body and to your spirit and to your spiritual life. And I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Excellent. Amanda?
My answer will certainly not be as eloquent as the previous two, but I think that my sentiment is very similar in a more anecdotal, I guess, way. After high school, I kind of pretty much abandoned all traditional prayer aspects of my life. I don't really go to Mass. I have been for holidays and funerals since I graduated high school. So I've very much strayed from that. And that was something that towards the end of high school I knew that I was disconnecting from. And for what reason, I'm not sure. But I think along those veins of getting away from that traditional, I fell a lot more in love with what I consider, meditation, which I do think is a form of prayer. Kind of just, again, taking that step away, feeling like time isn't existing. And not even that, just not thinking or not purposely thinking. I always struggled with meditation because I thought that my mind had to be completely blank. And if you know me, my mind's never blank. There's always something running through it. And in Dr. Johnson's class, I had it in the spring. So during Lent, she asked us to either, give something up or add something to our lives and journal about it for that whole month. And we would, write discussion posts that were just between us and her. And it was a really great experience because it was the first time that I pushed myself to continue with it and realized that I was actually getting a lot more benefit from it than I thought I would. Again, just having that time to disconnect and connect with myself, even though, yes, sometimes my laundry list of things to do runs through my mind still, but I could be like, okay, let's stop thinking about that for a while and just kind of connect with the now and the present. And that's what I really loved about what you said as well.
So do you miss the liturgical prayer, though?
In some ways. I think the thing that I connected with in liturgical prayer was always through music. That obviously was a big thing for me. You know, I sang in choirs my whole life. I cantored at my church all of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so even I was in Glee Club, and even a lot of that was spiritual stuff from time to time. It was kind of a mix of things. And that was something that I always related to more. I got really into modern Christian music for a while. Have you ever heard of K-Love?
Yeah.
I was a big K-Love fan for a while. It's just something about music is something that I can connect with. But at least where I'm at in my life and where I think I was getting to by the end of high school is, you know, sitting through Mass, I didn't feel like I was getting anything out of that. I didn't feel like I was growing closer in my relationship to God.
Well, maybe you should try Byzantine Catholicism. It's because the whole thing is sung. It's all singing.
Really?
Yeah, it's all musical.
I
am a cantor in the Byzantine Church.
Oh.
still want to come.
Can I
to
come?
camp.
Can we go on a field
We
trip?
should. I was gonna say I could never get into contemporary Christian music, but I do listen to a fair amount of Christian death metal. So
Oh my gosh.
you would love it, Dr. Drew.
I would really hate that. I listen to ancient Christian music. Today I was listening to Gregorian chant. I listen to a lot of Eastern European and Byzantine music, things like that, like chant, and I think that's what I listen to.
Yes.
Probably nothing from the last 200 years. But I'm living in the past. So for me, I have another job in this life as a singer and choir director.
You're the choir director?
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Did you know about this?
I knew that he was a chanter.
I generally keep it my spheres of influence separate.
Okay.
Well, you already told us to promote this episode like crazy. So,
Oh.
So now everyone will
everybody's
know.
going to know.
But I find singing for God is a completely different experience than just singing. I have no desire to go up on stage and, sing something in front of people. I have no desire whatsoever for doing that. But I spend an inordinate amount of time singing for God. Our religious, I sing in a lot of churches. I do a lot of things like this. It just so for me, singing is one of the prayers that I like the most. And if I was just alone in a room, I could still enjoy singing for God. It doesn't really matter for me if there's other people there listening. But I think music has an unbelievable power in that regard. And I'll say this, and I don't want it to sound full of myself, because I'm not. But,
Never.
But in my opinion, I'm an adequate singer, nothing more. And I get told at least once a week what a great singer I am and how much the singing moved somebody. I'm really a very good mathematician. Nobody has ever said that, oh, your mathematics really moved me, right? It hasn't really moved you? It has. So music even, I think, has an enormous power over people. So that when people, people are grateful for me if I sing at somebody's wedding or a funeral or things like that. They've been very grateful to me. And I'm not that good, but it's just the experience of it that it's something I think incredibly spiritual. So you could, I think, sing in a non-spiritual way, of course, right? I don't think if you're singing the songs from the Addams Family, it's necessarily spiritual. Maybe it is. But
Debatable.
But I think music has a power that maybe nothing else has. I mean, for some people, they could find it in poetry, but I think everybody finds it in music, right? Everybody hears that. Almost everybody hears the music and is drawn. That's why I think we sing so much in church. Because if you think about it, why are we singing all these things in church? Why is music so close? And not just in Christianity, in many, many religions, right? That singing is a part of almost every religion. Because I think there's something natural about that. And so you wanted to say something about that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, relating to your point, your last point, I think it's both the beauty of it and the kinesthetic element of it that really, I think, ties it together with, that it's ritual, that there is, of course, something kinesthetic about it. When I'm singing in choir as well, I feel more connected than if I'm just, saying a prayer during the liturgy. That's it. And also that I'm really into singing, and I'm a cantor as well, in the Roman Catholic Church. But, yes.
Sometimes my contribution to a discussion is just to say, I saw some quote somewhere, probably on social media, and it's probably some Catholic said it. When you sing well, you pray twice.
St. Augustine said that.
And so I only pray once. But, I have another favorite quote, sadly from a Protestant, about growing beards and how it's a very manly and rugged thing to do.
So your spiritual action is
Charles
growing a beard.
Spurgeon.
What is the quote?
It's something like, growing a beard is a most scriptural, manly, natural, and beneficial thing to do.
There have been many people in Christianity who were in favor of men growing beards. That it was seen as that was the manly, correct thing to do. Jesus had a beard, you should have a beard. I can't go without shaving I shaved today, but I already have like a beard. But my beard grows incredibly fast. So I have to shave like constantly because it drives me crazy to have any facial hair whatsoever. But from my point of view, I really like liturgical prayer. I love going to Mass. And I couldn't survive without it. Like, I need that constantly. So that I just like being in a church. And I can't really go long without it. And when the pandemic hit and they were telling us we couldn't, it was like I was like an addict that they were pulling me away from. Fortunately, after the first week, because I was the cantor, the priest and the cantor had to be there. So I got to go anyway. Otherwise, I was like panicking. I don't know what I could have done because I absolutely need it.
So my freshman year, I was, experimenting religiously a little bit, in the sense that I would occasionally go to an Orthodox church that's nearby. It's a Greek Orthodox church, which I chose that in particular because my high school friend was Greek Orthodox. And so there were some weekends where I would go to Orthodox liturgy in the morning, and then the 7 o'clock Mass on campus, and going to religious services twice in one day was just an incredible feeling. I thought maybe sometimes I'll go to Saturday church at the local downtown Lutheran church and hit all the big three denominations.
The thing, when I was a student, eons and eons ago, the thing I liked about Mass here was not so much that it was Mass different than anywhere else, but I enjoyed being with my fellow students. And I have to say, much larger percentage of students used to go to Mass than do now. There used to be many, many more Masses on campus than there are now. It was a significantly larger number. So I don't really know why that is, but that's definitely different. So do you get that sense of camaraderie when you're I'm not saying just at any Mass, but here at Mass at the campus?
Yeah. So I, back when I was a freshman, I was thinking about I'd like to volunteer at Mass and be a reader or something. And unfortunately, I mentioned the fact that I was not Catholic, and they said, well, they looked into it and they did some research, and apparently I couldn't. But the best they offered me, which I do really appreciate, is I'm the greeter. So I open the door and I say, hello, hi, have a good time at Mass, things like that. I always love to see friends of mine who, under ordinary circumstances, I wouldn't even assume anything about their religious life. To see them come to Masses, and then to see them again and say hey, saw you at Mass today. And there's that's all that we need to say.
Have any of you gone on any of the retreats here? You said you haven't gone on any of the retreats.
Yeah.
Did you go on any of the retreats here?
I have not.
That used to be another thing that many more students went on than now, and I don't really know why.
I have to say that actually most of my friends have gone. I just am too academic to be like, oh my gosh, no, I can't sacrifice an entire weekend, which sounds awful.
So which ones did they go on? They went on the search retreat or something like that?
Yes. Now there's also a lot of retreats for clubs as well aren't super religious. And another thing that my friends have done is the Ignatian teach-ins, immersions. I'm not exactly sure what they are exactly, but
I went on a lot of Ignatian retreats when I was a student, and some of them we were silent retreats, which I really liked. But many students are not ready for a silent retreat, I think. Amanda, I don't think that's in your
And the
wheelhouse.
gag is, I literally make that joke every time I give a tour. Because I give my whole retreat spiel, and I'm like, there's some, we run both secular and non-secular retreats. There's a ton of variety for whatever interests you. Silent retreats, which I could never do. Sometimes the joke lands, sometimes it doesn't. But
I really like
was just
silent
thinking
retreats.
about it. It would be fascinating, but I would be stir crazy a little bit.
I don't know. I think you get the atmosphere. It changes you, right? So that you're it's not like you're silent, that you're not thinking. You're talking to God and maybe talking to yourself, and so that you don't feel like you're being non-communicative. You're out of that state of
That's true.
people saying idiotic things to you.
And everyone else is also silent, so that kind of helps.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like... recently I've had to be on vocal rest on and off because of some things going on with my voice, and not talking is so hard for me. It is so hard for me. But part of that is also because I'm around other people. I live with 7 housemates. So, that part of it, I think, is what makes it difficult, not the necessarily being silent.
Yeah.
So I've been raised with my father telling me this quote, which one of you will probably know who said it, but it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. And
So your goal
my
is
father's been telling me that a lot through childhood. I don't want you to get the wrong impression of me that I'm like an energetic and extroverted person. I'm actually not. I remember our very first class we had together was calculus, and you probably don't even remember I was in it.
I do remember you were in it. Then the second one was combinatorics.
Yes.
My first one was combinatorics.
That's right.
And I don't know what day you decided to start picking on me, but that day changed the trajectory.
Well, that class was hard for me to teach because everybody's wearing masks, and it's hard to even know who's who because you don't see anybody's face, and so it was hard to get to know the students when you don't see anybody's face ever. It's bizarre. It's like in Star Wars, where you see the stormtroopers getting shot. You think, well, who cares, right? You don't know that there's a person in there. Without seeing them as a person, they might be a robot or something. You don't really care.
Anyway.
Yeah, you don't really
So
care
you
if they
need
get
to
shot,
care
right?
about
So
that.
it's like when you're walking around, it sort of robs people of their humanity when you can't see them. I'm not saying that we should have been wearing masks. Of course we should have wear masks, but it did have that effect that it robbed them of their humanity, yeah.
May I ask you a question now?
Sure, I might not answer, but go ahead.
Do you think that for the students that have been here over the pandemic, do you think that some of that transmission of the Jesuit ideals and the Catholic intellectual teachings have been lost because of that time that students had to spend away from campus? And not just that, but also the way that everything had to be altered in order for us to maintain a safe environment.
I think definitely yes. And here's the major thing I think that was lost. Education is a community experience. And you, as a student, you learn just as much talking to your fellow students as you do talking to your professors because you're having a common experience. So I give you a hard homework problem, and then you sit in a room together with your friends and you solve the problem. Mostly. So there, the experience, so you're in a counseling class and the teacher says, do this thing, you're doing the experience with another student. So you might, do pretend counseling sessions with a student and you learn from that. So it's the interaction with the students that's the vital aspect, and especially of a Catholic education, because you are about the other. When the pandemic hit, we're looking at a screen and you're just talking to a screen, and people could say, well, you could have a chat on the side, and it's not the same. It's not the same at all. Interaction with students is two people sitting over their pumpkin spice latte, and actually just talking in a free and natural way. That's where you learn, and I think the pandemic crushed a lot of that. And I feel bad for you students who had to live through that because you missed out on a lot of your college experience.
I
Yeah.
do have to say, just to support the school, my little brother, he's a grade below me, and we have a bunch of friends in common from high school. And he was telling me that all of his friends were starting school during the pandemic, was their freshman year, and they weren't even going to school, they were doing it online, whereas we got sent home our freshman year, but ever since then, we were back on campus even if our classes were online. And so even though it was somewhat of a crushing experience, the University of Scranton did a very good job of trying to get us at least as close as possible as we could to
We had it
in-person.
so much better than a
Yeah.
lot of other
Yeah.
students.
Just like his little brother, I also graduated high school straight into the pandemic. And while I do think that it was also just my own willpower of seeking out professors, you know, even though we had to social distance and, you know, I still went to office hours, a lot of students didn't, at least we had them. At least we had office hours.
Yeah, the resources weren't the same, but I feel like the university did a fantastic job of trying to emulate them as much as possible. I do agree that there's some things that they're just not the same, but at least we had some sort of semblance of that more than anything else, and I'm very lucky for that. My parents talk about that on panels for the school too, like just we did like an admissions thing, and I think that was a really big characteristic of my time at Scranton, how well they handled that.
I mean, the students that are coming in now are much less prepared because of the pandemic. Many of them don't have the necessary math skills or the necessary English skills, and we're trying to catch them up. So I imagine that high school has been even worse. At least if you've been in college a couple of years, you have a lot of the skills of learning on your own. So you could do, I mean, Zoom is a very nice tool, and you could use it for lots of things, but it doesn't replace
You
everything.
could use it to give us class when we have a snow day on
Yeah.
the first day of the semester.
Oh yeah, that was brutal.
I didn't want to miss even 1 second of my students, and I didn't want to
You're
rob
right.
them of anything
It
of
was the perfect
learning.
time to use it.
That's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, really good.
But when I was a student, I know I talked about this before, I loved being an undergraduate student, and I would have stayed here forever if it was possible,
Same.
because I liked the interaction with the other students. I liked talking to them and learning about what they were learning, and just discussing philosophy and mathematics and all this other kind of stuff. It was a great feeling. But I think, as you pointed out, Amanda, that is, some people think, oh, that's just college, but it's not really. There are many other colleges where you do not get that experience. That experience is really heightened here by the type of students we get, by the type of education we get. I mean, our education is not cheap, and people come here for a very specific reason, that they want that type of education for the most part, right? Not every single student comes here for that reason, but that's why we get the students we get, that they would prefer this to a sort of, you know, many educations in higher education are just nameless, faceless kind of things, where you're just sitting in a class of 200 people, and, you know, so they may have wild parties like in a college movie, but they don't have the college experience that you have of interacting with students on the same level.
And when you come to campus, you can feel it. Like, that's one of the biggest comments we get in admissions, and just if you talk to students on campus in general, like, I could go out and take a poll and I will tell you 90% of students will say it's the community that drew them to Scranton more than anything else. Because when you step on campus, you can see that interaction with students, you know. You can see people, you know, having those discussions on the way to class, and just the amount that we offer here. And I think that that's something that you don't feel, or at least I didn't feel at a lot of other schools that I looked at. And that's something that's really unique to here that I like to, you know, highlight.
I think perhaps the greatest, or one of the greatest blessings for me since coming to campus is that my freshman year roommate made our dorm room the de facto hanging out room for our friend group. And so there were times when I needed to do my homework and I was forced out of my own place into the common area to do my calculus. But more often than that, there were times where I wound up hanging with what would be my best friends when I wouldn't have taken the initiative to go out to their rooms myself as a shy student.
All right, so we'll have one last question then. So we'll just ask, what's the best part of your Catholic education so far here at the university? Let's go first.
I kind of already harped on this, but really, the professors here are what make my experience, and especially just in the Jesuit tradition, the things I learn most about the Jesuits are through the interactions I have with my professors. So that's been the biggest takeaway for me.
Michael?
That's a hard question.
I mean, combinatorics?
That just took me to a different plane of existence.
Hey, you know what? If I can find God in all things, just like Ignatius said, I can find him in a beautiful proof by Dr. Monks that takes 20 lines that 1 + 1 = 2. Using the piano axioms of number theory. And I don't know if I want to try to develop that more into some like pseudo profound point about how beautiful mathematics is, but I feel like I probably could. You probably could.
Yeah. I mean, mathematics brings you closer to God, in my sense, because I see the beauty in it. I see the just the wonder, the magic in it.
I'd agree with that, and I'd second that, and I'd say that's my answer.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna give a cop-out answer first. The relationships that I've grown here, from professors to students. Of course, I found Mike over here at this Catholic university. And the reason why we even met was because we were both religion nerds. If you want to comment on our first encounter, I told everyone, I'm really into studying Mormonism. It was like a fun fact. And he's like, what's this girl about? What's this girl on about? And then and then
somebody nerdier than me, and he was excited.
Exactly.
I think also the deep aspects, the deep focus on the humanities. That it's, again, I feel like a cop-out answer. I feel like it's very general, but you just wouldn't get it at especially a public university. If you're studying something like counseling, especially, it's seen as something more, counseling seen as a professional career. It's seen as, just something more practical. So, you don't really think of, but.
I think keeping in my tradition of making all my answers just ripped straight off from the SJLA professors. Something about how philosophy is the greatest thing to study because it's useless.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the liberal arts and the humanities, an understanding that you would never hear from a school that's not Jesuit or that's not Catholic or that's not religious is that there's value in studying something that's useless because it can enrich you in a different way if it's not enriching you by giving you practical skills or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely changed my perspective. And also that pairs really well with why I like theoretical mathematics instead of applied mathematics.
Me too. Me too. Some mathematicians have said that the best things in mathematics are things that have no application whatsoever, for that precise reason. They're not sullied by the mundane, right? There's something transcendental about them.
Or the use by governments in war.
Yeah, that's true too.
They said that about number theory, and then number theory
became that's right.
very practical. So
apparently you were paying attention in class. The 12 times I said that.
Became very practical in perpetuating capitalism.
But I mean, in the same way, sometimes philosophy is co-opted, right, by political movements or things like this. But I think it's a wonderful thing, and even like theater, right? So you're not going to end up being a professional actress, but being in the theater, it's an enriching experience, right? You're not going to be a professional philosopher, but studying philosophy is an enriching experience. And I think that's one of the major aspects of a Catholic education. is that you do these things just because they're an enriching experience, not because someday you're going to be on a job and they're going to tell you, okay, your job today is to tell us what Kant thinks about this, right? Yeah. That's not going to happen. And are these things you're learning going to benefit you out in the world? Absolutely, because you're learning how to think critically. But that's not really the reason you're doing this. You're doing this because it's an enriching experience. And hopefully, in a Catholic environment, you're learning this because it's bringing you closer to God. I mean, that's really the end goal. That was the goal for Ignatius in starting all of these Jesuit schools, bringing people closer to God. And it just so happened that the education they were giving them was so fantastic that these people were becoming super successful in every walk of life because they had this kind of education. So I should congratulate you on your choice of education and your excellence as students.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for being part of our podcast, and good night.